The wind whistled through the canyon as Josephine Zimmer squinted against the harsh Arizona sun, her knuckles white around the fraying rope handrails of the suspension bridge. Below her, the Gila River churned angrily against jagged rocks, a 100-foot drop that made her stomach lurch with every cautious step forward. She had no choice but to cross her father's medicine waiting on the other side in Casa Grande. Arizona Territory. 1885. The wooden planks creaked beneath Josephine's boots as she inched forward, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool April morning. The bridge swayed precariously with each step, the ropes groaning under her weight. She'd crossed this rickety structure dozens of times before, but never during the spring floods when the river below swelled with melted snow from the distant mountains. "Steady now," she whispered to herself, gripping her satchel tightly against her chest with one hand while the other clung to the fraying rope. Just a few more steps. The wind picked up, sending the bridge into a nauseating sway. Josephine froze, her breath catching in her throat as the wooden slats beneath her feet shuddered. A sharp crack split the air, and for one horrifying moment, time seemed to slow. The rope to her right snapped, ancient fibers giving way after years of weather and strain. The bridge lurched violently, tipping her sideways as the remaining supports strained and began to tear. Josephine's scream echoed through the canyon as she felt herself falling, her body pitched over the side of the collapsing structure. In that moment of pure terror, a strong hand clamped around her wrist. "Hold on," a deep voice commanded. Josephine looked up into the face of a man she'd never seen before, a tall figure silhouetted against the bright sky, one hand gripping the remaining support post while the other held her suspended above the churning waters below. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the determination in his jaw as he strained to hold her weight. "I've got you," he grunted, muscles tensing visibly through his worn cotton shirt as he began to pull her up. With a powerful heave, he yanked her back onto what remained of the bridge platform, the wooden structure groaning ominously beneath them. Without hesitation, he wrapped a strong arm around her waist and half-dragged, half-carried her towards solid ground. They collapsed together onto the rocky shore just as the final supports gave way, sending the entire bridge tumbling into the churning waters below. For several moments, Josephine could do nothing but gasp for breath, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the last pieces of timber disappear into the foaming river. The medicine her father needed gone, her only path back to her family's homestead destroyed. "That was too close," the man beside her said, pushing himself to his feet and dusting off his worn denim trousers. He extended a hand toward her. "Wyatt Prescott, madam. You all right?" Josephine accepted his hand, still trembling as she stood. Now that they were on solid ground, she could see him clearly, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Not the rough, unwashed drifter she might have expected out here, but a man whose presence commanded attention even in his simple attire. "Josephine Zimmer," she replied, releasing his hand quickly and smoothing down her skirts. "I'm fine, thanks to you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." His mouth quirked up slightly at one corner. "I reckon you'd be making acquaintance with those rocks down there." He glanced over the edge, then back at her. "What brings a lady like you across such a dangerous crossing anyway?" Josephine felt her eyes burn with frustrated tears. "My father's medicine. He has a terrible cough that won't heal. The doctor in Casa Grande has something that helps, but now—" She gestured helplessly at the destroyed bridge and empty canyon before them. Wyatt's expression softened. "Where's your home?" "About 5 miles east of here. We have a small cattle ranch in the valley." She sighed, pushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "It'll take me a full day to ride up to the crossing at Morrison's Bend and back down to reach Casa Grande now. My father's been waiting since yesterday." Wyatt gazed thoughtfully across the canyon toward Casa Grande, then back at Josephine. "I'm headed that way myself. I know another route. It's a bit rough, but we could make it there and back to your ranch before nightfall if we ride double." Josephine stiffened. "I couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition when a man's health is at stake," Wyatt interrupted. "My horse is just over that ridge. Strong animal, used to carrying extra weight." He studied her face for a moment. "Unless you'd rather try your luck finding another way across." Josephine bit her lip, considering her options. The stranger before her had just saved her life, but riding double with a man she'd just met went against everything she'd been taught about propriety. Then again, her father's ragged coughing had kept the whole house awake last night, and the medicine was the only thing that seemed to help. "All right, Mr. Prescott," she decided. "I accept your help and I'm grateful for it." A small smile crossed his features. "Just Wyatt will do, Miss Zimmer." "Then you must call me Josephine," she replied, surprising herself with the informality. Wyatt nodded and gestured toward a narrow path leading up the ridge. "My horse is this way." As they walked, Josephine couldn't help studying her rescuer from the corner of her eye. His movements were confident but unhurried, like a man comfortable in his own skin. The gun belt around his waist was worn but well maintained, and though his clothes weren't fancy, they were clean, a rarity for many of the drifters who passed through this part of the territory. "You're not from around here," she observed as they crested the ridge. "No, madam. Originally from Texas, but I've been moving around these past few years." He didn't elaborate further, and Josephine didn't press. Everyone in the West had stories they preferred to keep to themselves. Tethered to a scrubby juniper was one of the finest horses Josephine had ever seen, a powerful chestnut stallion with intelligent eyes and a white blaze down his nose. Wyatt approached the animal with a gentle hand, murmuring softly as he checked the cinch on his saddle. "This is Rusty," he said, patting the horse's neck. "Best companion a man could ask for out here." The horse nickered softly, nudging Wyatt's shoulder with his nose. Josephine couldn't help but smile at the obvious bond between the man and his mount. "He's beautiful," she said, approaching slowly and letting the horse sniff her hand before stroking his velvety muzzle. "And he knows it too," Wyatt replied with a hint of amusement. He adjusted the stirrups and then turned to her. "I'll mount first, then help you up behind me." With fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle, Wyatt swung onto the horse's back, then extended his hand down to her. Josephine gathered her skirts as modestly as possible and reached up to grasp his arm. With surprising strength, he lifted her almost effortlessly, settling her behind him on the horse's broad back. "You'll need to hold on," he said over his shoulder. "The trail gets rough in places." Hesitantly, Josephine placed her hands lightly on his waist, maintaining as much distance between them as the saddle would allow. Wyatt clicked his tongue, and the stallion moved forward, picking its way carefully down the rocky slope. As they rode, Josephine became increasingly aware of the impropriety of their situation. Here she was, pressed against the back of a stranger, his solid warmth unavoidable as they navigated the uneven terrain. Yet there was something undeniably comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safer than she had any right to feel with a man she'd just met. "Have you lived in Arizona territory long?" Wyatt asked as they descended into a narrow ravine. "Nearly all my life," Josephine replied. "My parents came out from Pennsylvania when I was just 4 years old. Father wanted to raise cattle, build something of his own away from the crowded East. And has he built something, I mean?" Josephine sighed, her breath stirring the fabric of his shirt. We've managed to keep going, even through the dry years. 25 head of cattle, a small vegetable garden, a few chickens. It's not much compared to some of the big spreads, but it's ours. The trail steepened, and Rusty carefully picked his way down a scree slope. Instinctively, Josephine tightened her grip on Wyatt's waist. "Your father runs the ranch with just you to help?" Wyatt asked, skillfully guiding the horse around a boulder. "My brother James helps too when he's home. He's 15, strong for his age. But he's in Tucson right now, staying with our uncle while he attends school." Pride colored her voice. "He's learning things none of us ever had the chance to learn, reading books on science and mathematics." "And your mother?" Josephine fell silent for a moment. "She passed 3 winters ago. Fever took her before the doctor could reach us." Wyatt's voice softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Thank you." Josephine swallowed the familiar lump in her throat. "That's why I'm so worried about father. He works himself too hard, and this cough, it's been getting worse for months." They rode in companionable silence after that, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them almost hypnotic. The narrow ravine opened up into a broader valley, and Wyatt nudged Rusty into a steady trot. "We should reach Casa Grande within a couple of hours," he said. "The doctor's name?" "Dr. Mitchell. His office is on the main street near the general store." Wyatt nodded. "I know the place." Josephine realized she hadn't asked what brought him to Casa Grande. "What's your business in town, if you don't mind my asking?" There was a slight pause before he answered. "Looking for work. I've done ranch hand jobs, some scouting for the army. Heard there might be opportunities around Casa Grande." Something in his tone made Josephine wonder if there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had their reasons for moving through the territories, and many preferred their privacy. The sun climbed higher as they rode, the April heat beginning to assert itself, despite the morning's coolness. Josephine was acutely aware of the impropriety of her situation, riding double with a man she barely knew. Her arms around his waist, but circumstances had left her little choice. Still, she found herself studying the strong line of his shoulders, the confident way he handled his horse, the careful attention he paid to choosing the safest path. They stopped briefly at a small stream to water the horse and stretch their legs. Wyatt produced a canteen and offered it to her first. The water was cool and refreshing, and Josephine realized how thirsty she'd become. "Thank you," she said, returning the canteen. Their fingers brushed momentarily, and she felt an unexpected warmth rise to her cheeks. Wyatt took a long drink himself, then splashed some water on his face, running a hand through his dark hair. "We should keep moving if we want to make it back before dark." The remainder of their journey passed more quickly than Josephine expected, with Wyatt occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief observations about the land. He wasn't a talkative man, but what he did say was thoughtful, revealing an intelligence and awareness that intrigued her. Casa Grande came into view by mid-afternoon. A dusty collection of wooden buildings stretched along a main street, with scattered adobes and smaller structures radiating outward. It wasn't a large settlement by any means, but it served as an important waypoint for travelers and ranchers throughout the region. Wyatt guided Rusty down the main street, past the saloon where a few early patrons already lounged on the porch, past the blacksmiths where the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil filled the air. They came to a stop in front of a modest building with a painted sign that read, "Dr. A. Mitchell, physician." "I'll wait with the horse," Wyatt said as he helped Josephine dismount. "Take your time." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly awkward now that they had reached civilization. "I won't be long, doctor." Mitchell was a kindly man in his 50s who had served the Casa Grande area for over a decade. He recognized Josephine immediately. "Miss Zimmer, good to see you," he said, rising from his desk. "I was beginning to worry when you didn't come yesterday." "There were complications," she explained, not wanting to go into detail about the bridge collapse. "I'm here for my father's medicine." The doctor nodded sympathetically. "How is Robert doing? Any improvement?" "The cough is worse, especially at night." "The syrup you gave us last time helped, but we ran out days ago." Dr. Mitchell frowned. "I've been concerned it might be developing into something more serious. This new tonic should help, but if the symptoms persist or worsen, you really must bring him in to see me." He prepared a larger bottle of medicine than before, explaining the dosage carefully. When Josephine reached for her purse to pay, he waved her off. "Your father can settle up next time he's in town. Getting him well is what matters now." Josephine thanked him gratefully and returned to where Wyatt waited, carefully securing the precious medicine in her satchel. "All set?" Wyatt asked, straightening from where he'd been leaning against a hitching post. "Yes, thank you. Dr. Mitchell gave us a stronger medicine this time." "Good." Wyatt's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "We've got a few hours of daylight left. Should be enough to get you home." As they prepared to leave town, Josephine noticed Wyatt scanning the street with an attentiveness that seemed more than casual interest. His gaze lingered on two rough-looking men exiting the saloon, and for a moment his posture tensed. Then, apparently deciding they posed no threat, he relaxed and helped Josephine mount. "Friends of yours?" she asked lightly as they rode past the men. "No," he answered shortly. Then, seeming to realize his tone had been abrupt, he added, "Just keeping an eye out. Town like this, you never know who you might run into." The ride back was quieter than their journey into town. Josephine found herself wondering about the man whose back she was pressed against. There was clearly more to Wyatt Prescott than he'd revealed, perhaps something he was running from or looking for. Out here in the territories, such mysteries weren't uncommon. Men and women alike came west to start over, to escape pasts they'd rather forget, or to search for futures they couldn't find back east. By the time they reached the canyon where they'd met that morning, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, bathing the rugged landscape in golden light. Josephine pointed out the trail that would lead to her family's ranch. "It's just through that pass and down into the valley," she said. "You really don't have to take me all the way." "I started this job, I'll finish it," Wyatt replied firmly. "Besides, I'd like to make sure that medicine gets to your father." The Zimmer ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest homestead nestled in a protected valley, with a small wooden house, a barn, and several outbuildings. A corral held a few horses, and beyond that, cattle grazed in the pastures that stretched toward the distant hills. It wasn't grand, but to Josephine, the sight of smoke rising from the chimney stirred a profound sense of belonging. As they approached, a tall, thin man emerged from the barn, a rifle held casually in one hand. He squinted against the setting sun, clearly trying to identify the riders approaching his property. "That's my father," Josephine said, a note of worry in her voice as she noticed how he leaned heavily against the barn door. Wyatt slowed Rusty to a walk as they approached, making their movements deliberate and non-threatening. When they were close enough to be recognized, Josephine's father lowered his rifle and raised a hand in greeting, though his posture remained wary. "Who's with you, Joe?" he called, his voice rough with what was clearly the cough that had been plaguing him. "His name is Wyatt Prescott, father," she called back as they drew closer. "He helped me when the bridge collapsed. I wouldn't be here without him." They dismounted in the yard, and Josephine hurried to her father's side, pulling the medicine bottle from her satchel. "Dr. Mitchell sent this. He says it's stronger than the last one." Robert Zimmer accepted the bottle with a nod, his sharp gaze moving from his daughter to the tall stranger who stood a respectful distance away, one hand resting on his horse's neck. Even ill, Robert Zimmer had an imposing presence, a lean, weathered man with the same auburn hair as his daughter, now streaked with silver at the temples. "Mr. Prescott," he acknowledged, extending his hand. "Seems I owe you my thanks for helping my daughter." Wyatt stepped forward to shake the offered hand. "No debt, sir. Anyone would have done the same." Robert's eyebrows rose slightly, skepticism evident in his expression. "Not anyone. Not out here." A coughing fit seized him, bending him double for a moment before he straightened, waving off Josephine's concerned hand. "I'm fine, Joe. Just need some rest and this medicine." He turned back to Wyatt. "You'll stay for supper, of course. Least we can do." It wasn't really a question, and Wyatt seemed to recognize the code of Western hospitality that made the offer non-negotiable. "Thank you, sir. I'd be obliged. Joe, show Mr. Prescott where he can tend to his horse. I'll go start on supper." With that, Robert turned and made his way toward the house, his steps slower than they should have been for a man his age. "This way," Josephine said, leading Wyatt toward the barn. "We've got plenty of feed and there's a pump for water just outside." The barn was neat and well maintained, with stalls for 4 horses, though only 2 were currently occupied, a sturdy bay gelding and a dappled mare. Wyatt led Rusty into an empty stall and began to unsaddle him with practiced efficiency. "Your father seems like a strong man," he observed as he worked. Josephine leaned against the stall door, worry creasing her forehead. "He is. Too strong for his own good sometimes. Won't rest even when he should." "Sounds like most ranchers I've known," Wyatt said with a slight smile. "Hard to keep a good man down when there's work to be done." "Even when it might kill him," Josephine sighed, running a hand through her wind-blown hair. "I've been trying to manage as much as I can, but there's only so much one person can do. We had a ranch hand until last month, but he moved on to California. Haven't been able to find a replacement yet." Wyatt brushed Rusty down with careful strokes, his movements gentle despite his size and strength. "Good help is hard to find in these parts. Everyone either wants their own spread or is heading to the mining towns hoping to strike it rich." "What about you?" Josephine asked boldly. "What are you hoping to find?" Wyatt's hands paused briefly in their work. "Not sure I'm looking for anything specific anymore. Just a quiet place to put down roots, maybe. Somewhere I can be useful." There was something in his tone, a weariness, perhaps, or resignation that made Josephine wonder what had driven this man to wander the territories alone. Before she could consider asking, he'd finished with his horse and was securing the stall. "Your father will be waiting," he said, changing the subject smoothly. "Lead the way." The interior of the Zimmer home was modest but comfortable, with handmade furniture and touches of feminine influence that had clearly survived Josephine's mother curtains at the windows. A colorful quilt over the back of a rocking chair, dried flowers arranged in a pottery vase on the table. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end and a cookstove at the other. A short hallway presumably led to sleeping quarters. Robert Zimmer was at the stove, stirring something that smelled savory and delicious. He glanced up as they entered. "Hope you like venison stew, Mr. Prescott. Joe shot the buck herself last week." "Sounds perfect," Wyatt replied, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "There's water in that basin if you want to wash up," Josephine offered, indicating a ceramic bowl on a side table. "I'll help Father with supper." As Wyatt rolled up his sleeves and began to wash the dust of travel from his hands and face, Josephine moved to the stove, gently nudging her father aside. "You should be resting," she murmured. "Have you taken the medicine?" "Just did," Robert confirmed, though he made no move to sit down. "Stop fussing, Joe. I'm not dead yet." "And I'd like to keep it that way," she retorted, but there was affection beneath the exasperation. Wyatt pretended not to listen to their exchange, but Josephine caught him watching them with an unreadable expression as he dried his hands on the offered towel. Supper was a simple affair: venison stew, cornbread that Josephine quickly mixed and baked in a cast-iron skillet, and preserves from last summer's berries. They ate at the sturdy oak table that dominated the center of the room, Robert saying a brief grace before they began. The conversation flowed more easily than Josephine had expected. Her father, despite his illness, was an engaging host who asked thoughtful questions about Wyatt's background and experiences without prying too deeply. Wyatt, in turn, shared stories about his travels throughout the territories, his time working cattle drives in Texas, and brief mentions of scouting work he'd done for the army along the border. "You handle yourself well," Robert observed as they finished their meal. "Military training." A shadow crossed Wyatt's face so quickly Josephine almost missed it. "Confederate cavalry. Long time ago now." Robert nodded, not pressing further. The war between the states had ended 20 years earlier, but its scars remained for many. "You mentioned you're looking for work." "Yes, sir." "Nothing specific in mind, but I'm handy with horses, cattle, can build just about anything that needs building." Robert exchanged a glance with Josephine, a silent communication passing between them. "We lost our hand last month. Been trying to manage on our own, but with this cough slowing me down." He trailed off, another fit of coughing interrupting him. Josephine placed a hand on her father's shoulder, concern evident in her expression. When he'd recovered, Robert continued, "Point is, we could use the help if you're interested. Room and board, fair wages, at least until I'm back on my feet properly." Wyatt looked between father and daughter, his expression thoughtful. "That's generous of you, considering you hardly know me." "I know you saved my daughter's life," Robert replied simply. "That counts for something in my book, and we're good judges of character. Have to be out here." Josephine held her breath, surprised by how much she hoped Wyatt would accept. Not just because they desperately needed the help, but because something about his presence felt right, as if he belonged here in a way she couldn't quite explain. "I'd be honored to help," Wyatt said finally. "Thank you for the opportunity." Relief washed over Josephine. With Wyatt's help, perhaps her father would finally be able to rest and recover properly. And if she felt a flutter of something else at the thought of seeing more of the quiet, capable man who had saved her life, well, that was something she would examine later, in private. The first week of Wyatt's employment at the Zimmer ranch established a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. He rose before dawn each day, joining Josephine in the morning chores before breakfast. Robert, following Dr. Mitchell's medicine regimen, and finally allowing himself some rest. Took slower to rise but was clearly improving, his coughing fits becoming less frequent and less severe. Wyatt proved himself to be everything he'd claimed and more: skilled with the cattle, gentle but firm with the horses, and capable of identifying and fixing problems around the ranch that had gone too long unaddressed. He mended fences, repaired the sagging corner of the barn roof, and cleared an irrigation ditch that had silted up during the winter rains. "Where did you learn all this?" Josephine asked one afternoon as she watched him skillfully reshoe the bay gelding. Wyatt glanced up from his work, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Life teaches you what you need to know if you're paying attention, and I've had a lot of different jobs over the years." You never talk much about your past, she observed, handing him a nail when he reached for it. Not much worth telling. He focused on driving the nail into the horse's hoof with precise, careful taps. War changes a man. Took me a long time to figure out who I was afterward. Josephine nodded, understanding that some memories were too painful to revisit. And have you? Figured it out, I mean. Wyatt straightened, patting the horse's flank before lowering its hoof to the ground. Getting closer, I think. His gray eyes met hers, and something in his gaze made her heart beat a little faster. This place helps. Honest work, good people. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Josephine couldn't quite name. Then Wyatt cleared his throat and moved to the next hoof, breaking the spell. Your father mentioned checking the north pasture fence line tomorrow, he said, his tone deliberately casual. Said there might be breaks from the last storm. Yes, he's been worried about that. Josephine leaned against the barn door, watching his capable hands work. I can ride out with you if you like. It's easy to get turned around out there if you don't know the property. I'd appreciate that, Wyatt replied. And though his focus remained on the horse's hoof, Josephine thought she detected a pleased note in his voice. That evening after supper, as had become their custom, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Robert had retired early, tired from a day spent going through the ranch accounts with Josephine. Your father seems stronger today, Wyatt observed, his chair tipped back against the wall of the house. The medicine is helping, Josephine agreed, her hands busy with mending a torn shirt. And so is having you here. He's actually resting instead of pushing himself to do everything. Glad to be useful. Wyatt's gaze drifted toward the distant hills, darkening now as the sun slipped below the horizon. It's beautiful here, peaceful. Is that what you're looking for? Peace? Wyatt was silent for a long moment. Maybe after the war I drifted, took whatever jobs came along. Some weren't what you'd call peaceful. He glanced at her. Ever wonder if a person can outrun their past, Joe? The nickname slipped out naturally, as if he'd been calling her that for years rather than days. Josephine set her mending aside, considering his question seriously. I think, she said slowly, that a person's past shapes them but doesn't have to define them. Whatever you've done, wherever you've been, it's led you here now. That has to count for something. Wyatt studied her face in the fading light, his expression softening. You have a way of seeing right to the heart of things, don't you? Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the growing darkness that hid her blush. Not really. I just believe people deserve second chances, sometimes third and fourth ones too. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft chirping of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. Josephine picked up her mending again, but found her thoughts wandering to the man beside her. In just a week, his presence had become such a natural part of their lives that it was difficult to remember how they had managed without him. More than that, she found herself looking forward to their moments alone, whether working side by side during chores or sitting in companionable silence on the porch. There was an ease between them that she'd never experienced with anyone else, a sense of understanding that required few words. What are you thinking about? Wyatt's quiet question pulled her from her reverie. Josephine smiled, her needle pausing in its work. How quickly things can change. A week ago I was crossing that bridge, thinking only of getting Father's medicine, and now. She met his gaze in the growing darkness. Now I can't imagine how we would have managed without you here. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for riding out to check the fence line. Robert insisted on joining them initially, wanting to show Wyatt the property boundaries himself, but after an hour, his fatigue was evident despite his attempts to hide it. Father, you should head back. Josephine said firmly when he paused to catch his breath after a coughing spell. Wyatt and I can finish checking the north section. Robert started to protest, but Wyatt intervened diplomatically. Sir, I've got a good sense of the layout now, and I promise we'll report anything that needs immediate attention. After some grumbling, Robert finally agreed, turning his horse back toward the ranch house. Josephine watched him go with concerned eyes. He's doing better, Wyatt reassured her as they continued riding along the fence line. But recovery takes time. I know, it's just... Josephine sighed. After we lost Mother, I can't help worrying. Wyatt nodded in understanding. It's hard losing someone you love. Makes you want to hold tighter to those who remain. There was personal knowledge in his words, and Josephine glanced at him curiously. You've lost people too. Most everyone has out here. He guided his horse around a rocky outcropping. My parents died when I was young, raised by my grandmother until she passed too. Then it was just me and my older brother William. It was the most personal information he'd volunteered since arriving, and Josephine recognized the significance of his sharing. Is William still in Texas? She asked gently. Wyatt's face grew somber. No, lost him in '68. Cattle raid gone wrong. He fell silent for a moment, then added, after that, nothing much kept me tied to one place. I'm sorry, Josephine said softly. They rode in silence for a while, following the fence line as it curved around the northern boundary of the Zimmer property. The landscape opened up into a broad meadow where spring wildflowers dotted the grass with splashes of purple and yellow. Look there, Wyatt pointed toward a section of fence where several posts had been knocked askew, likely by cattle pushing against them. We should fix that before it gets worse. They dismounted, tethering their horses to a sturdy post before examining the damage. Wyatt had brought basic tools in his saddlebags, and together they worked to straighten the posts and tighten the wire. As they worked side by side in the spring sunshine, Josephine found herself studying Wyatt when he wasn't looking the way his hands moved with such capable certainty. The concentrated furrow of his brow as he aligned a post, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face whenever their eyes met. What? He asked, catching her gaze on him. Nothing, she replied quickly, then reconsidered. Actually, I was wondering why you agreed to stay. You could have just delivered me home that day and continued on your way. Wyatt drove the repaired post firmly into the ground before answering. Truth is, I was getting tired of drifting. When your father offered the job, it felt right. He glanced at her, then back to his work. And I wanted to make sure you and your father would be all right. Is that the only reason? Josephine found herself asking, surprising herself with her boldness. Wyatt's hand stilled on the fence wire. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat. No, he said simply. Not the only reason. Josephine's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the spring breeze stirring her skirts and his shirt, the only sound the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. The moment broke when Wyatt's horse nickered softly, drawing their attention. Wyatt cleared his throat, turning back to the fence. We should finish this and check the rest of the line before heading back. Josephine nodded, aware that something had shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that had been growing since the day he'd caught her from falling. Whether either of them was ready to acknowledge those feelings aloud was another matter entirely. They completed their work on the fence and continued their patrol of the property boundary, finding 2 more sections that needed minor repairs. By the time they turned back toward the ranch house, the sun was high overhead, and Josephine found herself grateful for the wide-brimmed hat that shielded her face from its intensity. Your father mentioned at breakfast that he's planning to send a telegram to your brother. Wyatt said as they rode side by side along a well-worn trail. Yes, James should know about Father's illness, and honestly, we could use his help during the summer months before school starts again. Josephine smiled fondly. He's a good worker, even though his heart is set on books and learning. Nothing wrong with education, Wyatt observed. Opens doors that might otherwise stay closed. Did you have much schooling? She asked curiously. Some. Enough to read and cipher. My grandmother believed in education, made sure we knew our letters and numbers. He glanced at her. What about you? Mother taught me at home until I was 12. Then I attended the mission school in Casa Grande for a few years. I loved it, especially the books. Her expression grew wistful. Sometimes I miss having new things to read. The few books we have at home, I've read dozens of times. Wyatt looked thoughtful. Next time we're in town, we should see if there are any books at the general store, or maybe the doctor has some he'd be willing to lend. The casual "we" wasn't lost on Josephine, as if it was natural that they would go to town together, as if their futures were somehow intertwined. The thought brought a warmth to her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. I'd like that, she said softly. As they approached the ranch house, they could see Robert sitting on the porch, a ledger open on his lap. He raised a hand in greeting as they rode into the yard. "How's the north fence?" he called as they dismounted. 3 sections needed work, but we fixed them, Wyatt reported, loosening his horse's cinch. The rest looks solid enough to hold through summer. Robert nodded with satisfaction. Good work. Come on up when you're done with the horses. I've got something I want to discuss with both of you. Josephine and Wyatt exchanged curious glances as they led their mounts toward the barn. Any idea what he wants to talk about? Wyatt asked as they removed saddles and bridles. Josephine shook her head. No, but he's been going through the account books all morning. Maybe it has something to do with that. After settling the horses with fresh hay and water, they made their way to the porch where Robert waited, several sheets of paper spread before him on a small table. Sit down, both of you, he said, gesturing to the vacant chairs. I've been looking at our situation, and I think it's time we made some decisions. Josephine felt a flutter of anxiety. Is something wrong, Father? Not wrong exactly, but challenging. Robert tapped the ledger. We've been holding our own, but just barely. With the bridge out, we can't easily get our cattle to the Casa Grande market without taking the long route around. That's time and manpower we can't spare. Wyatt leaned forward, his expression attentive. Is there another market option? That's what I've been considering. Robert pushed a roughly sketched map toward them. There's a new railroad spur being built that will connect to Tucson. It'll run just 15 miles south of here through Ravenwood. Josephine studied the map. That would make shipping cattle much easier. Exactly. But to take advantage of it, we need to increase our herd, which means more work, more grazing land, and more hands. Robert's gaze shifted to Wyatt. I know you signed on for temporary work, but I'm wondering if you might consider something more permanent. Josephine held her breath, watching Wyatt's face carefully. His expression revealed little, but she thought she detected a flicker of surprise, followed by something that might have been pleasure. What exactly did you have in mind? He asked evenly. Robert coughed lightly, took a sip from the cup beside him, and continued. I'm proposing a partnership. You put in work instead of capital for a quarter share of the ranch. With your help and James returning for the summer, we could increase the herd significantly before fall. Wyatt looked stunned. That's generous, sir, but why me? You barely know me. I'm a good judge of character, Robert replied simply. And I've watched you work this past week. You know cattle, you know horses, and you care about doing things right. That's rare. He glanced at his daughter, a hint of a smile touching his lips. And Joe seems to trust you. Her judgment has always been sound. Josephine felt warmth rise to her cheeks, but she met her father's gaze steadily. "It's a good offer, Father, for all of us." Wyatt looked between father and daughter, his expression thoughtful. "I'd need to think about it. It's a big decision." "Of course," Robert agreed. "Take your time. But not too much time. Spring roundup is coming and we need to make plans." After Robert retired for his afternoon rest, Josephine found Wyatt in the barn, methodically cleaning tack with an expression of deep concentration. "You're quiet," she observed, leaning against the stall door. He glanced up, his hands never stopping their work. "Just thinking about your father's offer." "It's a good opportunity," she said carefully, "for everyone involved." "It is." He set aside the bridle he'd been cleaning. "But I need to be honest with you and your father before making any decisions." Josephine felt a knot form in her stomach. "About what?" Wyatt stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "About why I was at that canyon the day we met, why I was heading to Casa Grande. You said you were looking for work." "That was true, but not the whole truth." He met her gaze directly. "I was also looking for someone. A man named Lucas Blackwood." The name meant nothing to Josephine. "Why were you looking for him?" Wyatt's expression hardened slightly. "Because he killed 3 people during a bank robbery in Prescott 6 months ago. One of them was the sheriff, a good man who once saved my life. I've been tracking Blackwood ever since." Josephine's eyes widened. "You're a lawman." "Not officially. Not anymore." Wyatt sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was a deputy in Prescott for 2 years. Resigned my badge after what happened with Blackwood. The territorial marshal has men looking for him too, but—" He shrugged. "I made a promise to Sheriff Daniel's widow. And you've been tracking this Blackwood all this time?" "Alone," Wyatt nodded. "I picked up his trail near Phoenix. Word was he'd headed toward Casa Grande. But since I've been here, there's been no sign of him." Josephine absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man she'd come to know over the past week. "Why tell me this now?" "Because your father is offering me a partnership, a future here." Wyatt's voice softened. "And because I find myself wanting that future more than I expected. But it wouldn't be right to accept without being honest about why I came here." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable, and Josephine found herself more moved by his honesty than alarmed by his revelation. "Do you still intend to find this man, even if you stay?" "I don't know," Wyatt admitted. "Part of me feels obligated to keep looking, but another part—" He took a step toward her. "Another part wants to build something here, something that matters." The intensity in his gaze made Josephine's heart race. "And what would that be?" Before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard drew their attention. Exchanging a quick glance, they moved to the barn door together. A rider was dismounting in front of the house, a young man with auburn hair the same shade as Josephine's, dressed in a student's neat attire rather than ranch clothes. "James!" Josephine exclaimed, hurrying toward him. Her brother turned at her voice, his face breaking into a wide smile as he caught her in a hug that lifted her feet from the ground. "Joe, surprise! What are you doing here? Father only just decided to send for you this morning." James set her down, his expression growing serious. "Uncle William received word about Father's illness from Dr. Mitchell. He insisted I come home right away to help." His gaze shifted over her shoulder to where Wyatt stood a respectful distance away. "Who's this?" Josephine turned, suddenly aware of how the scene might look to her brother. "James, this is Wyatt Prescott. He's been helping us since Father fell ill." "Wyatt, my brother James Zimmer." The men shook hands, sizing each other up with the wariness of strangers. "Appreciate your help," James said finally. "How long have you been working here?" "About a week," Wyatt replied. "Your father's been kind enough to offer me employment." James nodded, though Josephine could see questions in his eyes that he was too polite to ask in front of a stranger. "I should go see father. Is he inside?" "Yes, resting," Josephine confirmed, "but he'll want to see you right away." As James headed toward the house, Josephine turned back to Wyatt. "We should continue our conversation later," she said quietly. Wyatt nodded, his expression unreadable. "Later," he agreed. The addition of James to the household changed the dynamic considerably. Though initially wary of the stranger his father had employed, James quickly came to appreciate Wyatt's skills and work ethic. The two men, though different in background and experience, found common ground in their shared tasks around the ranch. James brought news from Tucson, rumors of increased Apache activity to the east, reports of new silver strikes in the Catalina Mountains, and most importantly for the Zimmers, confirmation that the railroad spur to Ravenwood was indeed progressing rapidly. "Uncle William says the line should be operational by fall," he reported over supper on his second evening home. "He's already heard of ranchers making plans to drive their herds to the new railhead." Robert nodded thoughtfully, looking better than he had in weeks. "That's why I've been thinking about expanding our operation. With the four of us working together, we could handle more cattle." James glanced between his father and Wyatt. "Four of us." "I've offered Wyatt a partnership in the ranch," Robert explained. "Quarter share based on sweat equity." James's eyebrows rose, but to his credit he showed no outward sign of disapproval. "That's significant. Have you accepted, Mr. Prescott?" "Still considering it," Wyatt replied. "It's a generous offer. Just want to make sure I'm the right man for it." Later that evening, after Robert had retired and James was unpacking his belongings in his old room, Josephine found Wyatt on the porch, staring up at the star-filled sky. "James is a good young man," he observed as she settled into the chair beside him. "Bright, educated, you must be proud of him." "I am," Josephine agreed. "He works hard both with his studies and here at the ranch when he's home." She hesitated, then added, "He'll come around to the idea of the partnership if that's what you're worried about." Wyatt's mouth quirked slightly. I noticed his surprise. "It's natural. He's protective of our family, but he trusts father's judgment." Josephine paused, gathering her courage. "Have you made a decision?" "Almost." Wyatt turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "But before I do, there's something I need to know." "What's that?" "How would you feel about me staying? Not just as a partner in the ranch, but—" He took a deep breath. "As someone who hopes to be more than that to you in time." Josephine's heart seemed to stop, then race forward at double speed. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Wyatt reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "I'm saying that meeting you, saving you that day at the bridge feels like more than chance, like something I've been moving toward my whole life without knowing it." His voice deepened with emotion. "I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that when I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even realize I was looking for." Josephine stared at their joined hands, then at his face, searching for any sign of insincerity and finding none. In his eyes she saw only earnest hope, and something deeper in emotion she was beginning to recognize in herself as well. "I feel it too," she admitted softly. "This connection between us. I've never experienced anything like it before." Relief and joy transformed Wyatt's expression. "So if I accept your father's offer, if I stay?" "I would be very happy," Josephine finished for him, squeezing his hand. "But what about Blackwood, the man you were tracking?" Wyatt's expression sobered. "I've been thinking about that. I can alert the territorial marshal that I've lost his trail, let them continue the search. Maybe someday I'll hear word of him again, but—" He looked out across the darkened ranch, then back at Josephine. "I'm starting to believe there are more ways to honor a promise than endless pursuit." building something good, something lasting that might be a better tribute to Sheriff Daniels than vengeance. Josephine felt a surge of affection for this complex man who could be both determined tracker and thoughtful philosopher. "I think you're right," she said. "And I think you should tell my father your decision in the morning." Wyatt smiled, raising her hand to his lips in a gesture that sent warmth coursing through her. "I will, but first, there's something else I need to ask you." "What's that?" "May I court you properly, Josephine Zimmer?" "With your father's blessing, of course." Josephine couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "Yes, Wyatt Prescott, I believe I would like that very much." The next morning, Wyatt spoke privately with Robert, explaining both his decision to accept the partnership and his desire to court Josephine. Robert, to his credit, seemed unsurprised by either revelation. "I've seen the way you look at her," he said simply, "and the way she looks at you. I won't pretend it isn't fast, but out here, people learn to recognize what matters quickly." His expression grew more serious. "She's precious to me, Wyatt. Her happiness means everything." "I understand, sir, and I promise to do right by her and by you." Robert nodded, satisfied. "Then you have my blessing. On both counts." With the partnership established and Robert's blessing secured, life at the Zimmer Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Spring roundup kept them all busy from sunrise to sunset, with cattle to be counted, calves branded, and plans made for expanding the herd. Josephine found herself falling into an easy partnership with Wyatt that mirrored their growing personal relationship. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs, sharing both the labor and the quiet moments of beauty that punctuated ranch life, a spectacular sunset, a newborn calf taking its first wobbly steps, the rare wildflowers that bloomed briefly after spring rains. Their courtship progressed with the same natural ease, though always under the watchful but approving eyes of Robert and James. Evening walks around the property became a cherished ritual, a time for sharing thoughts and dreams, for learning the stories that had shaped each other's lives. "I never thought I'd find this," Wyatt confessed one evening as they walked along the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the ranch. "After the war, after losing William, I thought maybe some men weren't meant for happiness." "And now?" Josephine asked, her hand tucked securely in his. Wyatt stopped, turning to face her with an expression of wonder. "Now I'm starting to believe I was wrong, that maybe everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, even me." Josephine reached up to touch his face, her palm gentle against his cheek. "Not just a second chance, Wyatt. A new beginning." The look in his eyes made her breath catch such tenderness mixed with unmistakable desire. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down until his lips met hers in their first kiss. It was gentle, almost reverent, but held the promise of deeper passion carefully restrained. When they finally broke apart, Josephine kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. When she opened them, Wyatt was watching her with such naked adoration that she felt her heart might burst with answering emotion. "I'm falling in love with you, Josephine Zimmer," he whispered, his voice rough with feeling. "Good," she replied with a smile that belied the tears gathering in her eyes, "because I'm already in love with you, Wyatt Prescott." His answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, brilliant and full of promise. He gathered her close, his arms strong and secure around her, and Josephine knew with sudden, perfect clarity that this was where she belonged. As spring gave way to early summer, the Zimmer Ranch flourished under the combined efforts of its expanded family. Robert's health improved steadily, allowing him to take a more active role in planning and decision-making, though he wisely left the more strenuous physical labor to the younger men. James, home for the summer months, brought fresh ideas from his studies that complemented Wyatt's practical experience. Through careful management of their resources and Wyatt's skilled trading for additional cattle, they increased their herd by nearly 40%. The promise of the new railroad connection spurred them to prepare for a larger fall drive than the ranch had ever attempted. In late June, while James was in Casa Grande purchasing supplies, he returned with unexpected news. "There's a new marshal in town," he reported over supper. "Name's Fletcher. Been asking about a man named Lucas Blackwood." Wyatt's head snapped up, his expression instantly alert. "Blackwood? He mentioned why he's looking for him," James shrugged. "Something about a bank robbery up north. Said he had information Blackwood might be in the area." Josephine exchanged a worried glance with Wyatt. They had discussed his history with Blackwood with her family early in their courtship, wanting no secrets between them. "Did he say anything else?" Wyatt asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Just that anyone with information should contact him at the sheriff's office." James looked curiously at Wyatt. "You thinking of going to talk to him?" Wyatt considered for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I should. If Blackwood is anywhere near here, people should know how dangerous he is." Later that night, after everyone else had retired, Josephine found Wyatt on the porch, his expression troubled as he stared out into the darkness. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, settling beside him. "Just thinking," he replied, reaching automatically for her hand. "If Blackwood is nearby." "You're worried he might come here," Wyatt nodded grimly. "He's not the type to leave witnesses, and I'm one of the few people who can identify him." Josephine squeezed his hand. "Then you should definitely speak with this Marshal Fletcher. Perhaps together you can find him before he causes any more harm." "You're not afraid?" Wyatt searched her face in the moonlight. "This man is dangerous, Joe, if he discovers I'm here." "Of course I'm afraid," she admitted, "but running from fear never solved anything. We face it together, head on." Wyatt's expression softened with love and admiration. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I believe you caught me," Josephine reminded him with a smile, "just as I was falling." The next morning, Wyatt and Josephine rode into Casa Grande together. The town had grown noticeably busier since their last visit. With new construction underway and more traffic on the main street, all signs of the economic growth spurred by the coming railroad. They found Marshal Fletcher at the sheriff's office, a grizzled man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened intently as Wyatt explained his history with Blackwood and his reason for being in the area. "Appreciate the information, Prescott," Fletcher said when Wyatt had finished. "I've been tracking Blackwood since he hit a stage near Phoenix last month. 2 more dead." He stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Word is he's holed up somewhere south of here with a small gang, planning something big from what my informants say." "Any idea what?" Wyatt asked. "Railroad payroll, most likely. They're paying construction workers next week." Fletcher studied Wyatt with newfound interest. "Could use a man with your experience. Considering pinning on a badge again." Wyatt shook his head, his hand finding Josephine's. "I've got other commitments now. But I'll help any way I can with information." Fletcher's gaze moved between them, understanding dawning in his weathered face. "I see. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. Meanwhile, keep your eyes open. Blackwood's not the type to stay quiet for long." As they left the sheriff's office, Josephine could feel the tension in Wyatt's body, the conflict evident in his expression. "You're thinking about his offer," she observed as they walked toward the general store. "Just for a moment," Wyatt admitted. "Old habits." "I would understand," Josephine said carefully, "if you felt you needed to help, to finish what you started." Wyatt stopped, turning to face her in the middle of the dusty street. "My place is with you now, Joe, with the ranch. I meant what I said about building something that matters." "I know," she replied, touching his arm gently. "But catching Blackwood matters too, not just for revenge, but to protect others." She met his gaze steadily. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you." The love and trust in her eyes nearly undid him. Wyatt drew a deep breath, considering his options. "Let's finish our errands in town. I'll think about it on the ride home." They completed their shopping, gathering supplies for the ranch and, at Josephine's insistence, stopping at the small bookshop that had recently opened. Wyatt insisted on purchasing 2 novels for her, a gesture that brought a brilliant smile to her face. As they were loading their purchases onto their horses, a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group of riders was approaching at a gallop, dust billowing behind them. "Something's wrong," Wyatt said, instinctively moving in front of Josephine. The riders pulled to a hard stop in front of the sheriff's office. One man, his shirt stained with blood, half fell from his horse. "Marshal," he shouted. "They hit the construction camp. Killed the foreman and took the payroll." Wyatt and Josephine exchanged alarmed glances. Without discussion, they moved closer to hear what was happening. Marshal Fletcher burst from his office, followed by 2 deputies. "How many men? Which way did they head?" "6, maybe 7, the wounded man gasped. "Headed east toward the mountains. The leader, tall man with a scar down his cheek, said to tell you Lucas Blackwood sends his regards." Josephine felt Wyatt stiffen beside her. "That's him," he murmured. "That's Blackwood." Fletcher was already organizing a posse, calling for volunteers among the townsmen. His gaze fell on Wyatt. "Prescott could use your help after all." Wyatt looked torn, his gaze moving from the marshal to Josephine. She squeezed his hand. "Go," she said quietly. "This is important." "I can't leave you. I'll be fine," she assured him. "I'll head back to the ranch and explain to Father and James. Just promise me you'll be careful." The conflict in Wyatt's eyes was painful to see, but after a moment, determination settled over his features. He pulled her slightly away from the crowd, his voice low and intense. "I love you, Josephine Zimmer. When I get back, there's something important I want to ask you." Josephine's heart raced, recognizing the significance of his words. "I'll be waiting," she promised. "Come back to me, Wyatt Prescott." He kissed her quickly but thoroughly, heedless of the public setting, then strode toward Marshal Fletcher. Josephine watched as he accepted a deputy's badge and rifle, mounting his horse with fluid grace. As the posse thundered out of town, Josephine sent up a silent prayer for Wyatt's safe return before heading home with their supplies and the news of what had transpired. The ranch felt oddly empty without Wyatt's presence, though he'd only been gone 3 days. Josephine found herself listening for hoofbeats at all hours, starting at every distant sound. Robert and James did their best to keep her occupied with ranch work, but worry was a constant companion. On the afternoon of the 4th day, James rode in from checking the eastern fence line, his expression urgent. "Riders coming," he reported. "Looks like the posse returning." Josephine rushed outside, shading her eyes against the sun as she strained to see the approaching group. Her heart sank as she counted only 8 riders, 3 fewer than had left town. As they drew closer, she frantically searched for Wyatt among them, her breath catching when she couldn't immediately spot him. Then, at the rear of the group, she saw a familiar figure slumped slightly in the saddle, his shirt darkened with what appeared to be blood. "Father," she called over her shoulder, already running toward the approaching riders. "James, Wyatt's hurt." She reached the group as they entered the yard, Marshal Fletcher raising a hand in greeting. "Miss Zimmer," he acknowledged. "Your man's been shot, but he'll live. Took a bullet in the shoulder." Wyatt looked up at the sound of her name, his face pale beneath several days' growth of beard, but his eyes lighting at the sight of her. "Joe," he said, his voice weaker than she'd ever heard it. "Told you I'd be back. With James's help, they got Wyatt inside and settled on Josephine's bed, the most accessible room in the house. Robert sent James to fetch Dr. Mitchell while Josephine carefully removed Wyatt's bloodied shirt to examine the wound. "Bullet went clean through," Marshal Fletcher explained, hovering in the doorway. "We patched him up best we could in the field, but he needs proper doctoring." "What happened?" Robert asked, bringing clean water and bandages at Josephine's direction. Fletcher's expression darkened. "We caught up to Blackwood's gang in the foothills. Tough fight. Lost 2 good men before it was over." He nodded toward Wyatt. "Your partner there saved my life. Took that bullet pushing me out of the way." Josephine's hand stilled on Wyatt's wound as she looked up at the marshal. "And Blackwood?" "Dead," Wyatt answered weakly. "Made sure of it myself. He won't hurt anyone else." Relief washed over Josephine, followed immediately by concern as Wyatt winced in pain when she resumed cleaning his wound. "Try not to move," she instructed gently. "Doctor will be here soon." Fletcher cleared his throat. "I should get back to town, got prisoners to deal with, but I wanted to make sure Prescott got home safe." He touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, Mr. Zimmer, you've got a good man there, one of the bravest I've ridden with." After the marshal departed, Josephine continued tending to Wyatt while they waited for the doctor. Despite his obvious pain, Wyatt insisted on recounting what had happened, how they'd tracked the gang for 2 days, finally cornering them in a box canyon, and the fierce gunfight that had ensued. "Blackwood recognized me," he said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Called me by name. Said he'd been wondering when I'd catch up to him." Robert shook his head grimly. "Men like that always know their past will find them eventually." "What matters is that it's over," Josephine said firmly, dabbing Wyatt's forehead with a cool cloth. "And you're home." Wyatt caught her hand, his gray eyes intense despite his weakened state. "I realized something out there, Joe, when the bullets were flying and I wasn't sure if I'd make it back." His voice lowered to ensure only she could hear. "Life's too short to wait for the perfect moment." Josephine's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "I mean I don't want to waste another day." He struggled to sit up slightly, ignoring her protests. "Robert," he called, his voice stronger. "I know this isn't how it's traditionally done, but I'd like your blessing to ask for your daughter's hand. Right now." Robert looked surprised, then broke into a wide smile. "Son, you've had my blessing since the day you accepted the partnership. No need to ask twice." Wyatt turned back to Josephine, his expression so full of love it took her breath away. "Josephine Zimmer, I've loved you since the moment I caught you on that bridge. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Josephine's eyes, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Wyatt Prescott, I will marry you." He pulled her down for a kiss that, despite his weakened state, conveyed all the passion and promise of their future together. When they separated, both were smiling through tears. "Good timing," James said from the doorway, where he stood with Dr. Mitchell. "Looks like we'll need to plan a wedding as soon as this fool's well enough to stand at the altar." Dr. Mitchell bustled forward with his medical bag. "First things first. Let me see this wound before you two start picking out china patterns." The examination confirmed what they'd hoped: the bullet had passed cleanly through Wyatt's shoulder without hitting bone or major blood vessels. With proper care, he would heal completely, though he faced several weeks of limited mobility. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Prescott," Dr. Mitchell observed as he finished bandaging the wound. "A few inches lower, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "Believe me, Doctor, I know exactly how lucky I am," Wyatt replied, his gaze fixed on Josephine. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. While Wyatt recovered under Josephine's attentive care, plans for both the ranch's expansion and their wedding progressed steadily. Letters were exchanged with Josephine's uncle in Tucson, who promised to attend the ceremony with his family. Word was sent to the few contacts Wyatt still maintained from his earlier life, including Sheriff Daniel's widow, who wrote a touching letter expressing her joy at his newfound happiness. By mid-August, Wyatt's shoulder had healed enough for him to resume light duties around the ranch. The cattle herd continued to thrive, and preparations for the fall drive to the new railhead at Ravenwood were well underway. They decided on a September wedding after the most intense summer heat had passed, but before the demands of the cattle drive consumed their attention. Josephine, with help from the women of neighboring ranches, sewed a simple but elegant wedding dress from fine fabric ordered from Tucson. Wyatt commissioned a new suit from the tailor in Casa Grande, insisting on looking his best for the occasion despite Robert's good-natured teasing about putting on airs. The day before the wedding, Josephine found Wyatt at the spot where the bridge had once spanned the canyon. A new, sturdier structure was under construction, the framework already taking shape under the direction of workers from Casa Grande. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, coming to stand beside him at the edge of the canyon. Wyatt smiled, slipping an arm around her waist. "Just thinking about how different my life would be if I hadn't been here that day, if I hadn't caught you when the bridge collapsed." Josephine leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, the one that hadn't been wounded. "You believe in fate, Wyatt?" "I didn't used to," he admitted, his voice thoughtful. "Figured life was just a series of random events, good and bad, but now—" He looked down at her, his eyes soft with love. "Now I'm not so sure. Seems too perfect to be just chance that I'd be right here, right when you needed someone to catch you." "Perhaps we were always meant to find each other," Josephine suggested. "Just needed the right moment." Wyatt turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Tomorrow, I'm going to stand up in front of God and everyone we know and promise to spend my life with you. It still feels like a dream sometimes that a man like me could be so blessed." "A man like you deserves every happiness," Josephine said firmly. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with the sort of crisp autumn light that turned the surrounding landscape to gold. The ceremony was held on the ranch, beneath a canopy of cottonwood trees near the creek. Nearly everyone from Casa Grande attended, along with ranching families from miles around, all eager to witness the union of the couple whose story had become something of a local legend. Josephine, radiant in her ivory gown, felt no nervousness as her father walked her toward Wyatt, who waited beneath an arch woven with wildflowers. His face as he watched her approach was everything she could have hoped for: wonder, joy, and love so powerful it seemed to illuminate him from within. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such heartfelt sincerity that many in the audience dabbed at their eyes. When the pastor finally pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of all they would share in the years to come. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with feasting, dancing, and toasts to the happy couple. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch yard, Wyatt led Josephine away from the festivities toward the small cabin they had prepared as their home. It stood a short distance from the main house, close enough to be part of the family compound, but far enough to offer the newlyweds privacy. "Welcome home, Mrs. Prescott," Wyatt said softly as he lifted her over the threshold. Josephine's heart swelled with happiness as she took in the simple but comfortable interior they had created together, the sturdy furniture Wyatt had crafted by hand, the colorful quilt her mother had made years ago spread across their bed, the small bookshelf already filled with volumes both cherished and new. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning in his arms to face him. "Everything is perfect. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Wyatt traced gentle patterns on Josephine's bare shoulder, his touch reverent in its tenderness. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice dreamy with contentment. "The future," he replied. "Our future. Children running around the ranch someday, building something that will outlast us both." Josephine smiled against his chest. "I'd like that. A boy with your eyes, perhaps. A girl with your courage." "Your intelligence," Wyatt added. "Your compassion. We have time," she said softly. "A lifetime to build our dreams together." Wyatt pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "A lifetime that started the moment I caught you on that bridge." "No," Josephine corrected gently. "A lifetime that started today, when we promised forever to each other." The years that followed brought all the joy and challenges they had anticipated, along with some they could never have foreseen. The fall cattle drive to Ravenwood's new railhead proved successful beyond their expectations, establishing the Zimmer Prescott Ranch as one of the most promising operations in the territory. Robert, his health fully restored, continued to manage the business side of the ranch while gradually ceding more responsibility to Wyatt and James, who returned from his studies in Tucson with a degree in engineering and innovative ideas for improving their water management systems. The following spring brought their first child, a son they named William Robert, in honor of both their brothers. He was a sturdy, healthy baby with Wyatt's gray eyes and Josephine's determined spirit, the first of what would eventually be 4 children who filled their home with laughter and occasional chaos. Casa Grande grew from a small settlement to a proper town as the railroad expanded and more settlers arrived. Wyatt, respected for his role in bringing Lucas Blackwood to justice, occasionally assisted the local sheriff when trouble arose, but never again pinned on a badge full-time. His priorities remained clear: his family and the ranch they were building together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Wyatt surprised Josephine with a special gift: the deed to a small parcel of land that adjoined their property, which included the canyon where they had first met. "I thought we might build something there," he explained as they stood at the spot where he had caught her. "A proper bridge, strong enough to last generations. And maybe someday, a little cabin where we can go when we want to remember how it all began." Josephine, their youngest daughter cradled in her arms and their older children playing nearby under James's watchful eye, felt tears of happiness well in her eyes. "You've already built something that will last generations," she said, looking from their children to the thriving ranch in the valley below. "Something far stronger than any bridge." Wyatt followed her gaze, pride and contentment evident in his expression. "We built it together," he corrected gently. "And we're still building." As the sun began to set, painting the canyon in shades of gold and crimson, Wyatt slipped his arm around his wife's waist, drawing her and their daughter close. Josephine leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence as steady and reliable as it had been on that fateful day when the rope bridge broke, and he had caught her before the fall. In that moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built together, both recognized the truth in what they had often told their children, that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single step, or in their case, with a broken bridge and an outstretched hand. And as they made their way back to the home they shared, the love between them was as tangible as the land beneath their feet, a foundation strong enough to support all the dreams they still hoped to build, all the years they still hoped to share, and all the stories they still hoped to write.